So, here you have a member of the local militia interacting with, one of these migrant families who normally they would never meet in life outside of this setting.
Yeah.
And they're building real ties.
I'm Stan Christensen, and this is All Things Negotiation. Today, my guest is Jake Harriman. Jake is the founder of More Perfect Union, one of the most important nonprofits, from my perspective, in the country right now. They work to decrease the partisan divide in communities by holding meetings, doing service projects. We're going to learn all about that in the conversation. We're also going to talk about Jake's military experience and what he learned about negotiation from fighting in Iraq. We're going to talk about a nonprofit that he set up in Africa to help bring people out of poverty there. I think you're really going to enjoy the conversation. Jake Harriman, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks. It's an honor to be here.
I've been really looking forward to this conversation. Obviously, the thing that you're doing right now, which is running More Perfect Union, is so important in today's world, and we're going to spend a lot of time talking about that. But before we get to that, I'd love to know a little bit about your background. You started out in the military. Can you tell us just a little bit about how you grew up, where you grew up, and how you decided to go into the military before we talk about some of those stories?
Yeah, I grew up on a little tiny farm in rural West Virginia, up on a mountaintop. Grew up in poverty. Didn't really know it though. My parents were awesome. We lived off the land. My father had been in the Navy. He was a signalman on the USS Midway in the Gulf of Tonkin during Vietnam. He was really the only close relative that I had who had been in the military. But it really just kind of left a mark on me, this kind of sense that I should also serve one day, because my dad he didn't really even talk about it a whole lot. It just left that real impression on me that there was this kind of call to serve that we owe our fellow citizens. And so I just wanted to answer that call. And that's what kind of led me eventually to apply to the Naval Academy.
Amazing. And you know what, I've talked quite a bit about your experience and some of the stories. You have some of the best stories I've ever heard about military service. Could you share a couple with us that relate to negotiation and what you learned about negotiation from serving?
Yeah. Well, while I was at Force Recon and we were training to get qualified for our deployment, we had to do a mission called a visit board search and seizure. And this is when you take a small boat up against a merchant vessel and you basically do a ship takedown to recover a ship that's been taken hostage by pirates or any other kind of bad entity. And so the day came for our training exercise where we were getting qualified in VBSS. And I was being briefed by several different entities to prepare for the mission. One of the briefers was the weatherman. And the weather guy was telling us about the sea state. And he said, hey, look, it's going to be a sea state of 4 or 5. I can't remember the exact number, but that's an enormously high number. It's way too high to be able to carry out this mission. It would have been throwing the boat all over the place. But I wasn't listening to any of that. I was cocky. I thought we can do this. Doesn't matter how high the sea state is. I was very arrogant. I wasn't about to listen to him and let a weatherman get in the way of me qualifying in this mission. So we kind of and as I'm saying that, my guys are kind of shaking their head, and we go out there and get in our boats and start down the mission. And as we're coming up alongside this merchant vessel that we got to take down, the seas are indeed crazy. And one of the things we have to do to get on the ship, we have to do a hook and ladder where we set the hook with the little cable ladder on it and climb up the cable ladder onto the ship to start the takedown. And first we had trouble even setting the hook. Finally, we were able to set the hook. The ladder was on there. And our little boat, our coxswain's trying to keep our boat steady next to this big merchant ship. But it's getting tossed all over the place. And my guys are like, we're not going up that ladder, sir. This is insane. Like, we can't.
So chain of command not working. They basically are saying,
not
sorry.
Working. They're not working. It's like, this is crazy. And I said, fine, I'll do it myself. Just follow behind me. So I stood up. I was really angry. I stood up and I went to grab for the ladder. And as I did, the boat pitched really hard and threw me. I missed the ladder. The boat threw me like a lawn dart into the side of the merchant vessel, knocked me out cold. Next thing I know, I'm waking up 10 feet underwater and sinking fast. I'm wearing
So knocked you out. You're unconscious.
Unconscious. I'm sinking fast. I'm wearing like 70 pounds of gear. I'm freaking out. And I realize I've got a little horse collar life preserver. I pull that to try to get to the surface. Only half of it inflated. So I'm still not positively buoyant. So I'm struggling to get to the surface. Finally, I get to the surface, gasping for air. because it's a training mission, they're surface divers, they're safety divers in the water. They pull me out into the boat. I'm exhausted. I am highly embarrassed. They take the boat back to the main ship. And by the way, I had an encrypted radio in my pack that I'd failed to waterproof that was fried. It's like a $150,000 radio. We get back on the ship, and I get marched right to my commander's stateroom, his office on the big ship. And I think, okay, that's my career. I'm done. I'm getting relieved. You know, the guys get relieved for a lot less than that. And as I go into this guy's stateroom with my tail between my legs, I look at him and I said, "Hey, sir, I'm really sorry this happened. I understand if I can't stick around with the platoon." And he said, "I just want to know what happened." And so I said, "Well," and I thought to myself, I can tell him the truth or I can try to like make this sound good, but there was no way of making it sound good. So I said, "Okay, well, I was arrogant. I didn't listen to the experts. They told me I shouldn't go. I decided to go anyway. I was overconfident, way out over my skis, and I failed a lot of the basic procedures like waterproofing my radio. This is 100% my fault. Nobody's but mine." He said, "Good answer." He said, "What did you learn from this?" I said, "Well, I need to start listening to the people around me. That as a leader, one of the key things I need to be doing is listening and learning, and not thinking I know everything, that I have all the answers." And he said, "Another good answer." He said, "I'll tell you what, I'm not going to relieve you of your command. You're a commander who made a mistake, and if we never let commanders make mistakes and we keep firing them, you're not going to take risks when we're in combat, but you need to take smart risks, and risks that are not going to unnecessarily endanger the lives of your men."
Wow. So the negotiation there is essentially two things I get. One is you were excellent in your response and you were honest and you apologized, and he appreciated that. Second was he showed you that you got to let people fail. In negotiation, if you're not taking any risks and you're not learning from your failures, you're not going to have any employees left. And so I love that lesson.
That's right.
I remember you telling me a story once about a shouting match you got into with a general who wanted you to do a raid. Do you remember that story? Could you tell us about that one?
Yeah, so we were operating. We had deployed. We were operating in a place called North Babeel Province, which was southeast of Baghdad, and it was an area where the insurgent activity was on the rise. This was about 2004. They were starting to seat the new Iraqi parliament members, the MPs. And what had been happening was the insurgents were running assassination plots from North Babeel into Baghdad and taking out these MPs. And so they needed folks to go in and basically take out the leadership of these cells so that we could prevent these assassinations. So my unit, my platoon, was getting a lot of these missions to go in and do what are called direct action missions, where you go in and capture or kill one of these high value targets. And take them out so that they cannot continue to grow and carry out these assassinations. And so we had done this kind of night after night. And these are missions you do at nighttime. You don't do daylight direct action raids. Unless it's an insanely sensitive timeline where the target is only going to be in a location for an hour or two during daylight. And then we have to go through a lot of insane protocol to be able to carry out that mission. But what happened was a general was visiting our unit and wanted to kind of see our capability set, and he was only going to be there during the day. So he mandated that we were going to do a daylight raid on one of these targets that we had received. Now, this individual, this high-value individual, this target we were going to go get, he was a bad guy, but he was not like a super high-level priority mission, and I knew that, and also he was going to be in the area of operations for several days still. This was not time sensitive. And so this general said, "Hey, here's the mission set. We're going to carry this out during daylight hours. Here's the time frame that he gave us." And my guys came to me instantly and said, "Sir, Skipper, we can't do this mission. It's in daylight. This is insane. We're going to get people killed." And of course, I was furious as well. Like, this is not how we do things. So I thought for sure someone had just given him bad information. So I went into his office, into his little his area where he was holding up his office, and I said, "Hey, sir, just so you know, I'm sure someone briefed you incorrectly. We don't do daylight raids in this area of operations. It's highly dangerous. It's unnecessary. The target that we're going after is going to be here. The intel's saying he's going to be here for a few days still. We want to make sure we carry this out at night. It greatly decreases the risk that we're going to have any casualties or that any innocents are going to be killed in the process. So we just need to reset this for soonest at tonight. And he looked at me and said, look, I'm only here for a few hours today, and we're going to move forward with the mission as it is. I understand there's risk, but we need to do this today. And I was furious. Like he didn't listen to anything that I had said, and he didn't understand how terrible this was going to be. Like what a high level of risk he was putting my men in by doing this during the day. So basically, I looked at him, and we started to get in. I thought, okay, I'm going to give you one more shot, sir. I don't think you heard what I said. This is an incredible risk that you're putting these guys into if you do this during the day. And he looked at me and said, Captain, I don't care what you're saying. Carry out the raid. It's your job to take risks. Gosh. And so I shook my head, and I reached up and I took off my captain bars and I put them on his desk. And I said, if you want this raid to go on, here's my captain bars. Find somebody else to do it. And he couldn't believe it. Like he was just kind of dumbstruck. And I was pretty terrified because, I mean, that was basically, my career's over. That's a career-ending move if you do that. But he kind of like hemmed and hawed around and he said, I just can't believe how stubborn you are. And I said, sir, it's not about me, it's about my men. Like, I'm going to lose some guys if we do this during the day. And he finally backed down. We were able to do the raid later that night. He wasn't there, but I didn't care. All I cared about was that we didn't have to risk my guys in a daylight raid.
So as a negotiation lesson there, you have to sometimes draw hard lines and avoid avoidable risks in this case.
That's right. I mean, this was entirely avoidable. We did not have to take these risks.
Did you guys succeed? Did you take out the target?
We did. Yeah, we went back in there and we were able to nab that guy and bring him back. It was a successful mission.
Look, before we leave the military, I think you had one transformational experience. The story you told me in the past about, being on the road to Nasiriyah. Can you talk about that and how that impacted you personally and made you transition sort of out of the military into your next thing?
Yeah, I had a life-changing event that really changed the trajectory of my life permanently. I had a pretty good career in the military. I loved being with my guys. I loved the mission, loved the guys, and I was very committed to it as well. But during the early days of the invasion in Iraq, I had a pretty awakening experience that kind of like transformed my trajectory and career path. We had just survived the first major contact of the war in a place called Nasiriyah, which was one of the early battles, the Battle of Nasiriyah. And we had pushed through the city. We'd started taking casualties, pushed through the city, and dug in north of the city in a position to wait resupply. And southern Iraq at the time was one of the poorest places in the world. Saddam had been oppressing the populations in the south, terrible food security problems, no access to healthcare, education for the kids. And what had been happening as we moved through southern Iraq was the regular Iraqi army was retreating to make a final stand in Baghdad, but Saddam was pushing his Fedayeen soldiers south, these special forces guys, and they were going hut to hut in these rural villages, coercing these poor farmers to fight us, essentially saying, look, your kids are starving right in front of you. We'll drop off a bag of food here every couple of weeks if you pick up this weapon and go fight these guys 10 miles south of here. And in the early days of the war, we were fighting these guys by the hundreds. So that gets me back to this one morning after Nasiriyah where we dug in. My guys and I were exhausted, but as the sun started to come up, it was about 5 o'clock in the morning. I knew they were going to start shooting at us again. So I got up on out of my hole, started walking the lines to check on my guys, make sure they were okay and ready. I look up on the highway, there's this small white car starts racing toward our position from the north. So I think, okay, they've packed explosives in this car. They just started using vehicle-borne IEDs, suicide bombers. And so I grabbed 3 of my guys and we took off running toward this car to get it to stop. Finally, the car stops about 50 meters out. The driver hops out, starts waving his arms frantically at me and running at me. So now I think, okay, this guy's wearing a suicide vest. He's going to blow himself up. I'm yelling at him frantically to get on the ground. He's not listening. And as I lift my weapon, I think I've got to take this guy out. I look behind him, and this large black military truck rolls up behind his little white car. 6 guys in black jump out, run up to the car, and start shooting into the car. And so this man starts screaming, turns around, and starts running back to his car. And that's when I realized that this man was just one of these poor farmers who was trying to escape across our lines of safety because he didn't want to fight. And so I yelled at my guys to take out the Fedayeen, and I ran as fast as I could to try to save this man's family. By the time I got there, it was too late. I looked in the passenger side. His wife had been shot in the face and in the chest. She was slumped over dead. He had a little baby in the back whose arm had been shot off, and she was shot in the head. And he was cradling the body of his little 5 or 6-year-old daughter who had been shot in the stomach, and she was choking on her own blood as she was trying to breathe. And for the first time in the war, everything really slowed down for me. And I put myself in this man's shoes. And I thought, I live in a world of choices in this country. Where I want my kids to grow up, what I want them to have for breakfast, where I want them to go to school. What were this guy's choices when he woke up this morning? He had nothing. He could watch his kids starve to death. He could pick up a weapon he didn't know how to use or make some desperate attempt to cross our lines of safety. He had nothing. And that was the beginning of a really powerful awakening in me. An awakening that showed me the connection between the desperation that extreme poverty created in these impoverished areas we operated and how it fueled the growth of a lot of these violent extremist organizations that we were fighting. That in order to defeat this evil, these violent extremist organizations, we were going to have to create a more holistic strategy. Yes, we need our military to take out the leadership and those who are driving these organizations, but we also have to address the desperation that's allowing it and fueling it to grow in a lot of these impoverished areas.
Wow, that is just an intense and an amazing experience. Thanks for sharing that. So I think that maybe it'd be a good transition into talking about the organization you started after you left the military to try to address some of these problems. So maybe tell us a little bit about Nuru, how you decided to start it, what the mission was.
Yeah, so I when I had this kind of awakening, I did a few more tours and then realized I needed to transition out when my time was up and build an organization that could really address that problem, that could eradicate extreme poverty in these really fragile, unstable locations where other NGOs couldn't operate in order to help stop the spread of ISIS. And so when my time was up, I transitioned out. I went to Stanford Graduate School of Business to build that company. It was called Nuru International. When I graduated there in June of 2008, packed my bags, moved to remote areas of Africa in these conflict areas to begin building out the project. And it was a wild time trying to figure this out. I made so many mistakes along the way. The vision was to work in remote areas in what we call gray zones, in these conflict areas where other NGOs can't, work with local leaders to build locally and sustainable solutions to extreme poverty. So we would help farmers increase their crop yields. We build farming cooperatives, pool them together in cooperatives so they have more buying and selling power. They can defeat hunger. They can bring income and a local economy that's sustainable, and then give strength and resilience to the community so they don't have to accept these kind of violent extremist organizations moving through the area. That was kind of the vision that we got off the ground. So I did that, living in these villages for about 8 years, building and scaling. And as I mentioned, I made a ton of mistakes along the way, but I had a really great team. And because of that, over the next few years, we were able to empower about 450,000 people out of extreme poverty, build a global team of 280 staff, raised about $60 million to kind of get us there along the way.
Wow, congratulations. I mean, the countries that you were in, and I've been in most of these countries, and we've swapped stories on this. You were in Kenya, you were in Nigeria, Ethiopia, Somalia. Those places are tough. I remember arriving in Kenya to do a mediation between the at that time, Minister of Finance and the president of the country. And it was just a very dangerous and tricky place. I know that you've spent time in Kenya. So just tell listeners a little bit what that's like when you arrive there and try to get things set up. Is that sort of pretty different than the U.S.?
Yeah, it was different than anything I'd ever experienced. I remember coming in to my first week on the ground in Kenya. We were operating in Southwest Kenya, an area that was begun to be influenced by Al-Shabaab and some transnational organized crime in the area across the border with Tanzania. And, I came in with this kind of really arrogant attitude. I was coming from Stanford with all these smart ideas. I was going to, quote unquote, solve these people's problems. I was this kind of badass operator that was super tough. And man, did I get humbled that first week. My first week on the ground, I got jumped by a pack of thieves. I had safari ants and black widow spiders swarm my hut. We had an earthquake. I got malaria. And then the last day of the week, which was also my birthday, I got struck by lightning. And I mean,
how seriously struck?
I mean, I guess as serious as it is to get struck by lightning, it hit me and knocked me across the hut that I was in, and completely knocked me out. Luckily, I was wearing these Skechers shoes that had rubber soles, so the lightning didn't stay inside my body. It was able to leave my body, go into the ground. But I woke up as I was waking up, I thought my legs were on fire. And I had my friend had run across the room shaking me. And as I was coming to, I thought, oh my gosh, my legs are on fire. And he said, no, you're okay. And then when he realized I was alive, he does what any good friend does, and he starts laughing. And he said, I said, what's wrong with you? He said, you just got struck by lightning. And so, and I lived to tell it. So it was quite an experience.
You have one-upped all my stories. I remember arriving in Kenya, and I got on a public bus. This is a little before you were there in the 90s. And the bus got hijacked.
Wow.
So, two guys with machine guns jump on the bus, and I was the only, non-Kenyan on the bus. And so I just hit the deck. I didn't want them to sort of notice me standing out. Figured they, might think I had connections to either the Kenyan or the U.S. government. And these guys, it turns out they were just having fun. They drove the bus around. They beat up the driver, threw him off the bus, and they drove the bus around for 4 hours. They're picking up their friends. They're going all over the world. The whole time I'm just on the floor, just thinking I'm going to get shot.
Oh my gosh.
And so, setting up operations in these countries, I could absolutely visualize that situation. The Kenyan government has a real history of being corrupt, and you must have had to go through them and work with them to negotiate, agricultural support for farmers. They're not going to just let you do that. Any negotiation stories from negotiating with the Kenyan government?
Yeah, part of our model was we would purchase fertilizer from the government, because the government had a program where the price of fertilizer, if you bought it through the government, was heavily subsidized. So then we would lend that fertilizer to our farmers along with high quality seed, and then teach them best agronomic practices to help them increase crop yields. That was, and then once the crop yields were increased, they would harvest. They would then sell the produce back to the cooperative for a fair market price, pay their loan off, and have some extra income for their family. That was kind of the idea. But the whole thing falls apart unless you can get the inputs, unless you can get the fertilizer. And so I remember the very first time out of the gate, we started working with the government to try to get this fertilizer. We had already actually put the purchase order in, and had wired the first amount of money to the government. We were and the trucks had been loaded. We were waiting for input issue day. We had hundreds of farmers out all over this location who were waiting for their fertilizer at the drop sites. And I get a call, the government's not going to send the trucks. They were holding the trucks up. And of course, what they wanted was they wanted a bribe. And we didn't have money to do that. So I had to get on the phone with the Ministry of Agriculture and basically begin negotiating with them. And the way I finally got them to release the fertilizer, I said, look, we are not an NGO trying to make a name for ourselves in this area. You, as the government, are very unpopular in this region that I'm operating in right now. But if you do this program, we will give you all the credit. We'll give the government all the credit for this, okay? And you can be the kind of shining star and savior of these folks. We will tell the farmers that the reason that they were able to see this increase in crop yields is because the government provided this at a huge discount to the people because they care about the people and all this kind of stuff. And at the end of the day, that's the thing that convinced the local government officials to be able to release this fertilizer, which we'd already paid for. So it's not like they were sacrificing to let this fertilizer go. But that they needed to know that they were going to be able to get the credit, of course, the political gain from being able to release this fertilizer. So that's how we finally got it released.
That's such a great story. You could probably write a book on stories of giving people credit or letting it be their idea, and that being the thing that solved the negotiation. That reminds me of a time when I was on a service mission with I actually had 2 teenage kids at the time in Uganda, and we'd been about a week in a remote area, and we had a driver and a van, and we got back to the van after doing some vaccinations in a small village, and the local had taken the tires off the van and essentially holding us hostage, saying, like, look, I'll only give you the tire back if you give me $50. And our driver started negotiating with this guy who'd taken the tires, and it just wasn't going well. We were observing this from inside the van. All of a sudden, it started to get moving towards violence. So I jump out of the van, run over, get between them. Thought, using my mediation background, I'd have success, but I couldn't get these guys to agree. They're still hostile. And so all of a sudden, out of the jungle came like 30 guys with machetes, and they surrounded us, and I was really nervous. And sort of thinking quickly, I said, hey, is there a chief here? Is there a chief of the village? Because often there's that structure, as you know, in Africa. And a guy about 70 years old emerged. And so I grabbed him, and we even sat on a log on the side. And I said, look, our drivers do not want us to pay the $50 to get the tires back. But the money isn't really our concern. We're really more concerned with safety and security. What if I give you $50? You can choose to give it to the guys who stole the tires, or you could look at it as a donation to the community, use it however you want, sort of appealing to him, being able to be in control and being the big man there. And he kind of smiled at me and said, give me $50 and I'll take care of it. So I got him $50 and he waved the guys off who'd taken the tires. And so really knowing who the audience is and what they care about is an important negotiation lesson similar to the one that you learned.
Absolutely.
In that part of the world, transportation is tough. I'm guessing you have some stories from either border crossings or getting held up en route. Anything jump to mind on negotiation stories cross-border or trying to cross the border?
Well, I can say that some cross-border, but also just moving in general. So we always operated in really off-the-grid areas. And so, we'd be hundreds of miles from any kind of regional capital city, working out literally in the middle of nowhere. And so we also operated in very non-traditional ways. We did not take large SUVs, drive those around. We walked everywhere because we wanted to be with the farmers. We wanted them to see us with them, kind of like with them in the trenches in this fight together. That was an important part of winning them over, winning their trust. But to do that, it was also it was also very unsafe just to kind of walk out into the bush by yourself for 1 to 2 hours. And so we needed to find a way to guarantee our security as we operated in the area. We were, that first team that was in there, we were the only 4 Westerners operating in that area for probably about 300 miles. And so I needed to find a way to guarantee our security. So I identified the most powerful, most influential chiefs in the region. And I asked for a meeting to meet with these chiefs. And because we were bringing programs and resources, they were all eager to meet. So we do this meeting, and I basically say, look, here's the programs that we want to do in this area. Again, you're going to get credit for bringing these outsiders in that are helping the farmers in this desperately poor area that are struggling with a hunger season. What I need from you, I don't need any kind of fee. I don't need any kind of recognition. All I need from you is I need you to guarantee our safety. Because if something happens to me or any of the other members of my team, these programs are going to go away. and all of the benefits that you're going to reap from bringing these programs to the people and the thousands of farmers in this area are going to be gone. So the only way this works is if you help protect me. And they got it. They got it. I mean, they put the word out. And so what you would see is we would be walking out through the bush to these meetings with farmers, and you would see guys on the side. You know, it was tough to see them, but they were actually there guarding us as we were moving. They tried to stay out of sight, but we just felt, we knew that we were protected. And this was in an area where Westerners were being kidnapped a lot. So there were a lot of kidnappings that were happening. We never got touched because we were always taken care of, and the chiefs made sure that our security was in place.
I love that story. Again, I'm thinking of stories of my travels. I was working in Colombia during the sort of height of the narco traffic problems, and we were called down there to mediate between the guerrilla groups and the government. And similarly, you know, there were a lot of Americans getting kidnapped, and I was definitely a target being an American. And I remember talking to one of the guerrilla leaders, and I essentially said, look, if we don't succeed at this mediation, it's back to you negotiating directly with the government. So if you'll help me with security, I'll make sure that, we do something better than what you might do if you're negotiating directly with the government. And he got on his radio and he radioed these guys, and two guys show up on mopeds. They're like 15 years old with, big automatic weapons. And he said, these guys are going to protect you. And I said, these guys? Come on. And he explained to me, he said, look, we use the 14, 15-year-olds because they don't think about shooting. They think it's a video game. And, it doesn't matter how big and badass you are if the other guy has an automatic weapon. And I just couldn't believe it because I'd grown up thinking that security is about how big and tough you are. But really, security is about if someone's willing to use the weapon to defend you. And so I had a very similar situation in the jungles of Colombia.
Yeah.
We could go down rabbit holes of comparing stories on the developing world. So Jake, one concern that some Americans have these days is the military an independent organization? Is there loyalty to political leaders or to the Constitution? What's your take, having served?
I have so much confidence and faith in our military, in our men and women in service, in uniform. When we sign up, we swear an oath to support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. We don't swear allegiance to a person in the White House. We don't swear allegiance to a political party. And you've got to remember, even if members of the military senior leadership are being relieved of command or being fired or whatever, you have others who are coming up to take their place who have been prepared for that job for like 30 years. This doesn't happen overnight. As leaders progress both on the enlisted and officer ranks throughout their careers in the military, they are living and breathing a culture and a storied history of the military that's been around since our founding. And unlike other institutions and agencies, the military does not swing with the political winds. It is the constant, one of the guardrails of our democracy we can feel confident in.
I love that answer. Let's transition to More Perfect Union. How'd you transition out of Nuru and into More Perfect Union, and what were your goals there? And then let's tell some of those stories.
We started having some success downrange. And so I got on the radar of President Bush and President Clinton. They were starting this new program called the Presidential Leadership Scholars Program. It was a new program they were trying to start to kind of bring together leaders, emerging leaders from both the left and right, and try to help them take their models, their programs to the next level of impact, whether they're impacting the country or internationally. And so I was accepted into this program. And so, but to participate in the program, I actually had to move back to the U.S. Now, I hadn't been based here in the U.S. in almost 15 years. I'd been deployed downrange in combat as a Marine, and then I lived in these villages for Nuru for almost 8 years, out in the bush, just kind of building and scaling this thing. And I remember coming home for this program, and I was just shocked at what I saw. I did not recognize the country that I left to fight for in 2000. There was this bitter fear and hatred ripping the country apart. You had Americans hating other Americans just because of who they voted for. You had these, the political leaders were charlatans who ran for office not to help people, but to get famous. and to get lots of followers on social media. I just couldn't believe it. And I thought it was so sad. It was so sad because all of us had been downrange fighting for the idea of America to protect it against groups like ISIS and Al-Qaeda, only to realize it wasn't going to be those groups that defeated us. It was going to be us. We were going to tear ourselves apart. We were our own worst enemy. And then I got really angry. I thought, I wasn't about to watch a bunch of my buddies pay the ultimate sacrifice just to watch us tear ourselves apart here at home. And I felt compelled to do something. But I didn't know what to do. I knew nothing about politics. I'd never been in politics. I had some mentors that wanted me to run for office, and I thought that was a terrible idea. There's got to be a better way. And so then I had some of my donors who've been with me for about 8 years. They said, hey, look, we saw you as an outsider. You disrupted the aid industry with this model that had global impact. Would you now take a look at the politics industry? Is there a way to build out more of a center to help the country heal, to help heal the political divide in the country? So I was intrigued. I spent about 4 months, nights and weekends diving in, trying to understand the models that are out there, and put together a 40-page white paper on a strategy. I thought there was a real gap, and then had some of my mentors look at it. I had like Jim Mattis, John Allen, President Bush, a few of them said, you should do this. So I put together a 12-month transition plan out of Nuru International because I wanted to make sure that it survived the transition. Handed off the reins in June of 2020. I didn't have to worry. They're crushing it. I think they just had to get rid of me. And then in July of 2020, I stood up More Perfect Union. It's a veteran-led movement to help strengthen communities and heal the political divide in America through service, civics, and social gatherings.
Amazing. So you really learned, you're using what you learned building Nuru and applying it to the U.S. to try to build trust in communities. Maybe get a little more granular with us on how you do that. Talk about how the chapters, how many chapters, how many folks are involved in this? What do you do to build trust?
Yeah, so first, we call our chapters Brickyards. We were trying to build the country back brick by brick. And so honestly, we were using the same counterinsurgency skills that we used when we were downrange in combat. It's a veteran-led movement, but it's for all Americans. But the veterans, as they started, they're doing things like human terrain mapping. We're doing community mapping to understand who are the key influencers in the community, not just those in positions of authority or power, but who's really the power behind that. Who are the real influencers? And we get them to the table and build trust with them. And then we also do a lot of key leader meetings, to build that trust and build that awareness about who we are and what we're trying to do. And then we try to get those groups on both the left and right to bring together folks in their communities to the same table to do 3 different types of activities. And we start with what are called social gatherings to build just understanding. So this is like fun things like fitness challenges, potluck dinners, concerts. It's really just to get people together to have fun. It's to humanize the other side. Get folks to see that these are people just like me, care about their kids, want their kids to have a good future, a good education in the local schools, have safe places to play, roof over their heads. So it's building understanding through our social gatherings. The second one, pillar of our events is community service projects. It's really, we feel there's something magical that happens when you're serving with other Americans. It's really tough to hate somebody if you're swinging a hammer next to them, building a house for somebody in the community. And by doing the community service projects, we're building a deep level of trust across that divide. And then the third pillar of events that we do are called our civic engagement or civic education events. And this is really about creating ownership in our democracy. We talk a lot about rights and freedoms that we have as Americans, but there's also duties and responsibilities that come with wearing the American identity. And in this moment of crisis that we're in as a nation, it's important, we're a government of, by, and for the people. And we, the people, are going to have to get us out of this situation that we're in right now. We got to mobilize people to take ownership, people to be a part of the solution building in their own communities. So those are the different types of activities that we do. We've been around and growing quickly. I think there's a big demand for this in the quote unquote market. Americans want this. They're hungry for something. They want to do something. They're tired of the fear. They're tired of the divisiveness. And so More Perfect Union is giving them something to do. We started even just last year in 2024, we had 1,000 members nationwide in January. By September of 24, we had 10,000 members. And then by January of 25, by this year, we had over 35,000 members. So it's growing quickly.
Wow.
In all 50 states. And we think we're in a really important moment right now.
That's just amazing. I mean, if I understand the goals correctly, you're trying to decrease polarization. You're trying to help people avoid political violence.
Yes.
Gosh, if this were a for-profit venture, I'd say that market is big.
Yeah, market is big.
It's a big market. And so I'd love to hear some stories about the left and the right coming together and having discussions that really change things. Or is it really just general relationship building?
No, I think it's all about changing attitudes. And we talk a lot about humanizing the other side. If you're going to create long-term depolarization, you have to get folks from both sides to see the other side as community members just like them, positive contributors, folks who could contribute to the community just like they can. And I'll give you a couple kind of concrete examples of a couple events that have happened, have kind of shown that. We have a brickyard in a small place called, I'll give you a rural example and an urban example, a small place called Glen Rose, Texas. It's about 2 hours outside of Dallas, out in the middle of nowhere. A pretty amazing woman named Katerina, who's a Marine spouse, runs the brickyard there. She's the brickyard captain. She's a total badass. She's done amazing work out there building out the community. And she's actually become an invaluable asset to the local government there as well. The mayor regularly consults with her for advice on stuff. They come to her to help solve the community's problems because she's become a real icon and earned the trust of everybody in the community. So one type of event that's an example of event that she did, she does an annual event now called Share the Love. And in these events, she and her husband offered one of their pigs for a hog roast. And so they sacrificed one of their pigs and roasted it for everybody in the community. So everybody had a really good meal. And then at the same time, they did a clothing drive. So members of the community were to bring clothes that they didn't need any more extra stuff to the clothing drive, which then they repurposed it for other members of the community that were really struggling and kids needed shoes, they needed clothes for school, they needed backpacks for school supplies, things like that. Those families could come and pick up free stuff at the clothing drive. And the event was a huge success. It was over 200 folks came to the first one, and it was a really interesting mix. So that mix can be kind of personified by what one of our team members witnessed at one of the tables. There was a migrant family from Mexico that had been working in the community for a while. They came and they brought their kids because their kids needed some clothes. They were receiving some clothes and some shoes from the drive, and they sat down with some of the food at the picnic table next to this older white lady from the community. We'll call her Gladys. She was sitting next to them at the table, and they started just having a conversation. And they were laughing and just kind of carrying on about, just learning to try to get to know each other. And the Mexican family was trying out their English, trying to learn from the lady, and the lady was trying to learn some of the basic Spanish, build on some of the basic Spanish that she knew, and they were just having a fun time. So after the Mexican family, the migrant family left, my team member, who was also at the table, just started talking to the lady and just to get to know more about her. Say, "Hey, Gladys, is this your first Brickyard event?" She said, "Oh yeah, this is great. These people are so lovely here, and I actually had to miss my Patriot event this week to come to this thing." And he's like, "Oh, Patriot event? What is that?" She said, "Well, me and a few families about once every month go down to a farm a few miles from here, and we do small unit tactics that we practice down there." And our team member's like, "Oh, Gladys, you're in a militia." So here you have a member of the local militia interacting with one of these migrant families who normally they would never mix, they would never meet in life outside of this setting.
Yeah.
And they're building real ties. I mean, they were both having a great conversation. They were enjoying one another's company, having a good time. And in fact, Gladys was giving some of her clothes to the kids in the family. So they formed this really cool connection. And that's one example.
Let me ask a question about that.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to picture this, and these are pretty different folks, the migrant family and the militia member. You said you sometimes have a facilitator to help people have conversations.
Yeah.
Do you give people topics to talk about, or you just let them mix and hope it works out?
No, we do. So every event that we do, we have a structured activity, and usually that's either a service project, or it's just a fun event, or it's we'll bring in somebody from local government to train about how city council works, how people we can engage to solve problems in the local community, things like that. And then so we do the activity. Then we have a meal together. We break bread together to be able to have a good time. And then the last thing we do is a curated conversation. And the curated conversation is always around one of our 6 core values. And one example of one of the conversations is one of our core values is around hope. And so the conversation that we do around hope is around the American dream. And it's a curated conversation about what does the American dream mean to you? And it starts with the individuals kind of at the table. And then, then we expand it to their families. What does the American dream mean to your family? And then we expand it beyond that and say, what can the American dream mean for our community? What does it mean here for us together? As kind of one people together. How can we help every member in this community achieve and feel the power of the American dream, right? And it's great because you get into a lot of vulnerability. So what you do is you break down barriers in the activity so people begin to trust one another, so they're able to be vulnerable in the conversation and open up and tell some real stories that are hard. Because the American dream means a lot of different things to a lot of different people, depending on how
Sure.
you grew up and where you come from, what your values are. And we learn from one another in those conversations. And again, it's about humanizing one another again. Just because you voted for this person in this last presidential election doesn't mean you're a communist or you're a fascist or whatever it might be. You're a person. You got kids like I do. You're trying to make it like I am. You're trying to make sure you save some money up to buy their clothes and their school supplies for the next school year, that kind of stuff. Pay for their sports that they want to do, and it really does a great job of kind of humanizing folks to one another and uniting these communities. And you form this, just like I was doing in Nuru, you form in these communities this resiliency that blocks out the extreme voices. You diminish the power of the extreme voices and their ability to gain access to these individuals. Because in a fragmented, broken, isolated structure and community, they're easy to pick off by these extreme voices. But if you're unified together and strong together, and you've already built that trust, it's hard to break into that as an extremist.
I love that. How do you recruit the folks to come? Because I'm imagining that you want some of the people a little bit at the extremes, whether it's left and right or whatever criteria you want to use. Is it voluntary? Do you go recruit people to come be part of these Brickyards? How do you coalesce the community to come together?
So it starts with the leader, so the Brickyard leader. The Brickyard leader is trained in community mapping to be able to map out all the different elements in the community. And do they lean left? Do they lean right? What are their ideologies? And we deliberately recruit from those parts of the community to come to the table to these events. Now, when you come to the event, you're not wearing blue hats and red hats. Nobody knows who you voted for. Nobody knows any of that stuff, right? Mm-hmm. Except for the leader. The leader knows the folks that they're recruiting to come to the events. Because, if we're all just Democrats into these events talking to one another, there's no bridging there. There's no healing across the divide. If we're all Republicans, it's the same thing, right? So we really need to get different voices, different ideologies in the room to be able to start healing the divide, to be able to start bridging and doing that work to unite these communities and strengthen our communities.
That's great. We probably have time for maybe one more example. I'm sure you've got hundreds. You mentioned that you work in urban areas as well as rural areas. Do you have an urban story about a Brickyard that went well and some mutual understanding happened?
Yeah. One example would be in the Washington D.C. Brickyard. So we have a brickyard in Washington D.C. And the brickyard captain there has been building out a really great group of folks from both the left and right. And after the election, Doge got up and running and began to make a lot of serious cuts in the federal government. And so a lot of folks in D.C. had begun to lose their jobs, were losing their livelihoods. And it was really severely painful. And within the D.C. Brickyard, you had folks who had voted for Trump and folks who had voted for Kamala Harris. And because of the work that had been done before the election, those folks liked each other, and they were already talking. And they'd done park cleanups together. They'd done a lot of these curated conversations together. They'd done a lot of fun events together, had a lot of meals together. So they already liked each other. They already knew each other a little bit and built a kind of a basis of trust. So as these cuts started happening, the brickyard captain, Ben, decided to hold an event where the curated conversation was really about what are some of the struggles that you're seeing right now in your community specifically. And we were going to start to tease out some of the challenges that we can begin to address as a brickyard. And I was there for this specific event. And in one of the groups, there was a really rich discussion. So one of the Trump voters, a great guy, Army vet who had been contributing a lot to the Brickyard, was in that group. And there was another young guy who was recently out of college who had just lost his job from one of the Doge cuts, and he was really upset. And he was struggling. He didn't know how he was going to pay his rent. And he was telling his stories, really kind of tearing up. And the guy who was the Trump voter, his heart broke for this guy. And, he just started, offering him any way he could to help him get on his feet, find his next job, opening up his own network to help this guy, and this is, again, it's a situation where those two individuals would never normally meet. They're not in their own social circles, right? But because of the trust that had been built and the friendship that had built within the Brickyard, here you have two people on opposite sides of the political aisle when one had really been suffering because of some of those decisions that had been made politically. The other side came together with him to really try to get him on his feet and help him in a material way.
Wow, it's such a great story. This is a topic of conversation for most of us every day. And I think a lot of people are paralyzed. They just don't know what to do. When you're paralyzed or you're anxious or you're fearful, you have to have something to get you unstuck. And what you guys are doing is I think, getting people effectively unstuck. And it's just so admirable. If you were going to summarize just negotiation lessons that you've learned from participating in these brickyards, or stories that have come, through your staff, what would be the 2 or 3 most important negotiation lessons of things that happened in addition to the things you've mentioned?
I think one is the very first one that comes out, and I tell everyone this, is learn how to actively listen. Listening, it sounds so simple, but it's actually really hard to do, especially when you're in a situation where you're speaking with folks who have a very different opinion than you do. Many of us start to dig in and start to think about how we're going to defend our arguments. And you kind of shut your brain off, and you stop listening to what the person's saying. And so the first tenet of negotiation, I always tell people for these times, is you have to listen, and that you have to actively listen. That means ask questions back of the person to clarify their point and their perspective. Instead of waiting for them, like I have done so many times, instead of waiting for them to pause in their talk so you can jump in with your point, right?
Yeah.
Just realize, number one, it's not about you. You need to actively listen. Second is it dovetails off of listening, is really try to be empathetic. Put yourself in the other person's shoes to try to really understand their argument and their perspective and their life's experience. Like, where are they coming from on this? Because it's going to help you when you begin to present your own side of the story or of the argument or of the issue. If you can really approach it from their worldview, of their lived experience and their perspective. If you don't understand that in the beginning, you're not going to be able to actually reach the person in a way that makes sense to them, right? So build that kind of empathetic worldview by putting yourself in their shoes and really making sure you understand their world. And then the last, I would say, try your best to find commonality in the other person. I'm a big believer, too many folks today say there are two Americas that are forming and they're irreconcilable. I don't believe that. I believe that we are based on a fundamental set of values that we share in common. We just have to remember those values and find that common ground again. We call it finding higher ground. Go beyond common ground, find higher ground, that can bring us back together around these kind of common core set of values. But find that commonality in the other person as you're having that conversation and negotiation.
Amazing. So you mentioned that this is really run by veterans. If someone is listening to this and is not a veteran but would like to get involved, or is there room for them?
Absolutely. It was started by veterans, but it's for everybody. It's for all Americans. In fact, half of our Brickyard leaders now are those who have been in AmeriCorps, Peace Corps, Teach for America, those who have served their community in some other capacity. But this movement is for all Americans. We started with veterans because folks still trust veterans on both the left and the right. And if you have served other people, especially in one of these other groups, AmeriCorps, Peace Corps, et cetera, people have a tendency to trust those individuals, those leaders who are willing to serve other people. So service is a really core element to the leaders that we recruit, hire, and train.
So if I don't have training in a place like AmeriCorps or Peace Corps, do you guys train people to be facilitators, or how can I jump in and tell listeners where they can go to get involved, your website or whatever's best? So
step number one, go to mpu.us, moreperfectunion.us, mpu.us, and sign up today. You can join the movement, provide your email address, contact info, and you will begin to receive a steady stream of emails with information about how you can get engaged, concrete actions that you can take first in your own community to start to get involved with the movement. And then if there's a brickyard in your community, it'll help you get plugged in directly to that brickyard, start going to events, participating. And all of our brickyards are always looking to build out their leadership committees. So they're looking for leadership. If you want leadership and you want to take that leadership, there's lots of room for you in this movement. Or if you just want to go and participate. And then finally, if there's not a brickyard in your local area, we will get you on the path to starting one. And we'll give you the tools and the knowledge that you need to be equipped with to be able to launch that.
Well, Jake, this has been an excellent conversation. Your career is so inspiring. I mean, we could have done an hour on each of your military career, your career abroad with Nuru, and now running More Perfect Union. And so I just think hats off to you, and thank you for all the work you do for all of us.
Thank you, Stan. I appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to All Things Negotiation. Please subscribe to the show on Apple, Spotify, or YouTube. If you enjoyed the show, tell a friend, and be sure to engage with us on social media. Your likes, comments, and reposts make a big difference and help others find the show. The show was produced by Ezra Trupiano, original music by Peter Breinhold, and designed by Aubrey Benson. Thanks for listening.